Living Life Juicy podcast. Conversations with interesting people you should know. Welcome to the Living Life Juicy podcast, where we explore how we can be present and kind as we do great things. I'm your host and guide, John Losey. If you're interested in video resources, insights on how people grow and groups develop, go to the Growing People podcast YouTube channel and blog. This is all part of the Into Wisdom group. Check out intowisdomgroup.com if you're curious about it. And of course, be sure to like, comment, subscribe to this podcast and tell others. And just a quick preview. I've been asked by people who support what I do to start a Patreon. So that's going to be coming in the next few weeks. Look for the info. So today's guest is Tom Steffen. He's the senior pastor at the church I attend, Monte Vista Presbyterian in Newbury Park. He's also a writer, a speaker, a surfer, a father, and a golden retriever owner. I've known Tom for almost 20 years, and I'm excited to get to know him a bit better today. I'll let Tom get more into who he is and what he does, but for right now, welcome, Tom.
Thanks, John. It's great to be here. Looking forward to having our conversation.
Yeah, me too. So I'll start off with this question. How do you describe what you do? I mean, no, you're a pastor and a lot of people have that, but if somebody's like totally clueless, has no idea what you do as a pastor, how do you explain it to them?
You know, that's a great question. I appreciate that, because people do make a lot of assumptions of what a pastor is. Well, two things happen. They either assume you don't do anything except preach on Sunday, and they make the joke, oh, you got like 3 hours of work. What a great job. Or they also, if they're close, they assume like you're always busy. People will say that to me all the time. I know your schedule is really full. So I would say the best way to describe what I do is, well, there's a couple things that I do every week. One is there's always administration stuff. There's always sermon preparation is big. I would say sermon preparation takes a lot of time in terms of study and then writing. That's always, I would say, you know, that's really, people ask me how long it takes to do a sermon. It takes me 8 to 12 hours to kind of every week to put together a sermon. For me, it's kind of like writing a new song every week, like if you were a musician. And I think about it that way. For me, it's a very creative, thoughtful process. And then I spend a lot of time with people. And the with people is either staff at our church or in community, meeting with people, and then also meeting with different either other pastors or organizations. That's a big part of it. And the other critical part for me in terms of what I do is I don't want to do what I do without being who I want to be. And so like at our church, we talk about prayerfulness, compassion, humility, and enthusiasm for the gospel. So for me, every day includes thinking through, how am I going to live out being prayerful, compassionate, and humble in what I do? So that's another big part for me. It's a huge part for me in terms of my own time in the morning and then through the day too as well. And then also just thinking about enthusiasm, like what does it mean to live with enthusiasm with what I have on it? That goes even down to emails. Like when I write emails, I see those as interactions with people, and I have to be thoughtful about it. So that's what I do.
As I'm going to follow up just a second, but you said something about that brings up a model of, have you heard of the be, do, have approach?
I think you told me about it once.
If you don't have what you want, look at what you do. And then if you're not doing those things, look to who you are. So if you want to change, first, look at the be. What are you being? How are you doing it? And then how do you behave? And that'll change what you have. And I heard a little bit of that when you were talking about wanting to be, present and humble and grateful in everything that you do. And it starts with who you are. That impacts your behaviors, and that ends up impacting what you have or what you're getting. Does that make any sense?
Absolutely. I mean, like what you just described is the be, do, have is what, yeah, absolutely. It's kind of how I think in the morning. Yeah. Like in the morning, I will, whether I'm journaling or just driving and praying, I will think about my day, and I will just literally visualize kind of what I know I'm going to do. And because sometimes things change. And then like just think ahead. What does it mean to be prayerful, compassionate, and humble in any of those situations? Like even like today, like thinking about being on the podcast, just kind of think about it ahead of time, want to be present and be who I am. Yeah. And for me, it's just critical because so many people have so many impressions of pastors. And I really, just for sure, like I want to live a life of integrity, that my inside is my outside, and that people can kind of experience that. So they're never surprised that what they see on Sunday morning is the same thing they see at a coffee meeting or in surfing or whatever. So
okay, so you described a little bit about what your day looks like, all that kind of stuff. Two questions that are similar. Where do you spend most of your time? And what is the most important thing that you do? Are they the same? Are they different? Most time and important stuff.
yeah, so most of my time is spent in two areas. One is in relationships, and relationships for me are anything from emails to coffee to passing through the office and listening to the staff and seeing how they are. So relationships are huge. And then the other is knowing and living into what God's word is. And so that's the preaching or prepping for Bible studies. Like those two things are big for me. Because those are the two priorities that I want to live out, being in relationship and knowing God's word. And I would say prayer is the other one. And that's how I spend my time. Like most of my time, it's very intentional, being with people and then making sure I have time to do the study and to be in God's word. Yeah, it's kind of interesting, John, when I first came to Monte Vista. So you're right, we've known each other 20 years, and I was sitting in our parking lot. I was just beginning this whole deal. I went from youth ministry to senior pastor. So I always described it as going from bodyboarding to surfing, standing up surfing in the ocean. I know the environment, and I know like the ocean. Like when I went from bodyboarding to surfing, I knew about waves, I knew about all this, but it was a whole different thing I had to learn. Same thing, I think, from youth ministry to senior pastor, is like I knew the environment, like I've been in church for a long time. But so I was sitting in our parking lot and I was praying. I'm like, okay, Lord, when I leave Monte Vista, whenever that is, what do I want the church to know about me or to experience from me? Ultimately, like, what would I define as a successful ministry? And it kind of goes back to what we just said. One was that they knew that I loved them, being present with them, and that the church knows that they are cared for. That was a big one for me. And the other one was that they knew that I loved God and being in his word and prayer. So for me, those two parts of ministry do define how I spend my time in so many days. Because it's been a priority for 20 years.
It's interesting when you were describing relationship stuff, you described things that a lot of people would say were tasks, like emails and meetings and things like that. You have shifted the frame from that's something I got to do to something that is relational. Is that was that an intentional shift of turning tasks into relationship? And how difficult is that?
Yes, the answer is yes, it's intentional. But I don't think I thought about it. Well, maybe I did, about turning tasks into relationship. I do remember when I started doing that, though, back when I was working, the first full-time gig I had at a church in Baltimore. I used to be in charge of mailing out the youth newsletters. First, I had to make a monthly newsletter for the youth. This is pre-internet, pre all of that. So we sent out a monthly newsletter. And then I was the guy who made the newsletter, cut and paste, putting the little things on it and Xeroxing.
Truly cut and paste and then Xerox it.
Cut. No, it was not a computer cut and paste.
I remember those days.
Oh yeah, dude. And so that was true. But so when I started the mailing, I had to do the mailing to send out the 40, 50 letters or whatever it was. I used that as a time to pray for each student. And so, and even that became relational. So instead of just putting the label on the envelope, I would say, "Oh, Chris Debus," and I'd pray for Chris, put the label on, and move on. And it would be a short prayer. It's not like I'd spend 10 minutes a letter, but it would just ask God's blessing on it. So I would even say, yeah. So way back then, so that was 30 plus years ago. This was already part of my understanding. And the other thing that someone told me a long time ago about pastors, that pastors sometimes walk into an office and they think they're the lead. They think they're the head of the show. They think they're the important part. Walked in the office. Everybody has to drop everything. The pastor walked in. And an uncle of mine actually was telling me about that and how that offended him when he saw pastors do that. So right at the beginning, he told me that a long time ago. So even that, like, I even see like walking in the office is part of this whole relational thing. You know, so when I walk in and I see, yeah.
No,
Like,
I was gonna say that there's probably some people listening here that are thinking, if you're out there, you're probably thinking, well, of course, he's a pastor. He's got to do that. But how important is turning task into relationship and humbly walking into the office? How important is that for business leaders and managers? And do you think that is something that is a good practice for people outside of ministry?
I totally think, completely believe that when someone knows that they're known and that they're loved by their employer, and being known is the work that they're doing in addition to just, and by loved, I mean, you are patient, you're kind with them, you don't insist on your own way, you're not arrogant, you're not rude. Like, that's what I mean by love. I'm not talking about like you feel this affection all the time, but I am talking about the act of love. When people experience that from their employer, they become better employees. They feel valued, they feel understood, and then they're ready to go because they're not a cog in the machine. They're a person doing the work. And I would say any business, any leadership position, that affect creates better employees. And it also helps you as a leader to know who they are. So if they're not the right fit, if something's not working well, you have a relationship there's a trusted relationship, you know, and your voice is an important voice. So yeah, I think totally. Yeah. And trust me, dude, and I think you know this, and I think people would say it, there are a lot of pastors who don't practice what I would call incarnational ministry with the people they work with.
Yeah. And you hear a lot these, like from the pandemic, but even before that, there's a phrase that's become really popular, which is connection before content. And I think that's very true if you are a teacher, educator, and the point is content. Now, if you're a facilitator, I would change it to connection before process. And the same thing goes with like meetings and things like that, where it's about moving through things. But in business, and I'm not saying that churches are a business, but there are skills that you need to do, is that it's got to be connection before transaction. And a lot of leaders step into an office and it's about transaction. It's about task. I got to get through the task list. But what happens is if it turns into transactional, then you lose people. You turn people over. They feel like they're being used. Their only value is that transaction. But when you turn a task into a relational opportunity, you've just connected before you made the transaction. Now, there's going to be things that you need to do that are transactional. But if you start with that, if you lead with that, you're going to lose your people. So, thoughts?
Well, yeah, real fast. You have, like you've been a part of churches, a lot of different variety of churches. You've done ministries in different places. You've done business. I mean, and you've seen how people can feel like a tool as opposed to a person.
Yeah.
As a function, as opposed to a person who is engaged in. And for me, that's huge. Like the person, when the person comes first, they will be able to do what they're volunteering to do. Because I have to say that's the other one of the distinctives, and I agree with you, the whole business is part of the church. But the what's distinctive about the church is more often than not, the people you're working with are not employees making a salary, but they're volunteers living into what they want and love to do. And so if they're doing what they want and love to do, and if they're treated as a tool, that will eventually kill their desire to do it because they're not seen as a person. But if they're seen as a person and they're doing what they want and love to do, and they're receiving real connection, like that great word, real connection, it does become like payment on some levels, if you want to use the business model, like because they experience a joy in what they get to do, and they feel appreciated, and that's huge. It's just huge.
Yeah, and so my biggest flaw in the past in working in businesses and corporations is that I get so outcome focused, and I know hey, we got to get this done, and all of a sudden connection becomes a technique, and it becomes a transaction. I need to connect with you in order to finish this transaction, rather than that's like the catchphrase for the podcast is being present and kind. And I don't think you can be kind unless you're present, but it's on the way of doing great things. And not just me, but the people who we surround ourselves with, it's about helping them do great things too.
Yeah.
And if I'm so focused on getting my task done, that person just becomes, the connection becomes a transaction in and of itself, and not necessarily knowing that person so that you can be kind to them and help move them forward. But that's kind of the path that I've taken here, is that I've gotten feedback that, man, John, sometimes you walk through the cubicles and you don't notice anybody around you because you're so focused on doing really, really good work that you alienate people. And that's something I work hard on now, is trying to be there and not just look at what you need to do or what you can do to help me get my job done. It's really about stopping, taking a breath, being present with that person, not as a transaction, but as a true connection. But the next question I want to explore is, how did you get here? You just explained about what you do and why you do it a little bit, but what was your journey? It's almost like a superhero origin story. How did you get here doing what you do?
Yeah, thanks again. I like thinking about that because I don't always think about like the origin story of why I'm doing what I'm doing. But it's interesting, even as we're talking, I know where it came from. So grew up in the church for sure. And for me, growing up in the church is just going on Sunday mornings. So that was all a part of who I was and what our family did. And also in my family, there's addiction, and that was all part of who I am and what I did. So I think the church facilitated a place for me to go. But it really, for me, it began, if anyone ever seen the movie, The Jesus Revolution, and that movie that came out recently talking about the development of a church called Calvary Chapel in Costa Mesa and what God was doing in that was a big part for me. I was about 10 years after that movie. But that was a place where I was a regular church going person at a Presbyterian church, but it was there seeing Christian rock concerts on Friday night, that opened my eyes to more than just traditional church. And the guy who would speak every week, super long hair. I had long hair at the time. I had hair at the time. And in addition, he was just using everyday language like, dude, sweet, this is cool. And that helped me to see that all possibility. Then I went to college, got a degree in music and economics. And it was the summer of my freshman year in college where a friend of mine asked if I would go to a Christian camp and be a counselor. And I hadn't really gone to camps. I went to one in Catalina, like in middle school. Maybe I think I went twice, maybe, but had never really been a part of it. But I went to this camp and it was awesome. There were like 7 leaders and 5 kids. It was a super small. I think it was Quaker or like that type of camp. It wasn't Quaker, but it was something around that. But after that camp, I was driving down the hill, and I was 18, 19 at the time. And I thought, what do I like to do? And really 2 things became true as I was driving. One is I like to talk to people about Jesus and who God is. I love doing that. And the other one is I love being with people. And that moment for me in my truck as I was driving down changed. So I shifted my major from music to church music. I got involved working at a church through college, and that never really changed. So that was the origin. Like that was the origin of why I was doing what I was doing. Because it's not like my family had pastors in it. My dad was a bartender. My mom was a school teacher. But that was kind of a beginning point. And I'd also say a big influence on all of that was I have two older brothers who I will always say they partied enough with enough drugs and alcohol and everything, and did a lot of just rebellious things to kind of live a lifetime of books written about it. So I think what was happening in me, the only way I could really differentiate in terms of my own self from a family is to become a pastor and do really good in school. Like I actually think that was my rebellion, because my brothers, right? There's no way I would catch up to the hippie component of my oldest brother and the punk rock component of my second oldest brother.
Yeah.
And we were all like within 4 years. Like my oldest brother was 3.5. My second oldest brother was 2 when my twin brother and I were born. So my parents had 4 under 4 years old. And even like in high school, my oldest brother was a senior, my other brother was a sophomore, me and my twin brother were freshmen. So we were all really close in age. And just as a part of that. So my one brother who graduated a year before my twin brother and I, out of a class of 350 people, he was voted teacher's nightmare out of all 350. He was punk rock, hardcore. This is 80s. And then the next year, the exact next year, my twin brother and I were sitting in the front row, the whole valedictorian section, and I was voted by my senior class as most talented. And like the spread between the two was huge. And I think for me, part of that continued spread was being engaged in the church. And that's always been a part of me. It's always been a part of what I do. And that for me is part of my story in terms of why I am here now. I'm here now because I have a deep, deep thought and compassion for people who are struggling with addiction. And also there's no real reason why I'm doing what I'm doing and my brothers have done or doing what they're doing, except that God took a hold of my life. And I said yes to it. I believe God was reaching out to all of us, and we all reached out in different ways, but that's kind of why I'm here. That's the quick origin story.
Yeah. Curious, I think we had a little crossover. Are the Calvary Chapel concerts down in Costa Mesa?
Yeah.
What were some of the what bands do you remember going to see?
So in fact, I was just listening 2 nights ago to Undercover. Undercover was kind of this newish, new wave punk rock Christian band. Leslie Phillips was huge for me, seeing her. Daryl Mansfield band was part of that. Randy Stonehill was part of that.
So I remember my brother, who is a heavy metal guy, hardcore rock and roller. We went and saw Daryl Mansfield at the Cal Lutheran College, CLC, before it was university. And he walked out going, "Man, that was better than the Who." That Daryl Mansfield. But I remember going down there and seeing bands like Sweet Comfort and Randy Stonehill. I think I saw Keith Green at Cal State Northridge. Yeah, so I'm sure if you were down there, because we're the same age, I'm sure we were probably at some of the same concerts.
Oh, absolutely. I would imagine. I mean, Daryl Mansfield, I still remember his concert and him talking about his testimony of slitting his wrists on the altar of a church and God saving him. Oh, huge. Like, and big impression on me, all of that.
Yeah. High school, that pretty much defined, like I was way into that. And then when I heard Servant for like the 4th or 5th time, and they did exactly the same set with exactly the same scripted monologues in between, I got a little bit disillusioned with Christian music. But I still love, like, Larry Norman was never scripted. Larry Norman was kind of like the Jesus music for the non-Christians and radical, and Keith Green was kind of the Jesus music for the Christians who were too settled.
I would totally agree with that. Yes, absolutely. And it was like, like for me, the Christian music was a part of what I did on Friday nights, but at that point in my not church life, it was heavy metal all the way. Like I was at the US Festival in 1983 on Heavy Metal Sunday. And so I was in both camps in terms of music.
Yeah.
But I loved it. It was great. So
Yeah. So curious, you being down in Orange County and Costa Mesa right on the water, what role does the ocean play in who you are and how you became who you are?
That's a great question. So the ocean has been an important part for our entire family. My three brothers and my dad, for sure. Like we would go down to the beach, and my dad just loved the water, and I think he got in each of us a love for the water. Um, for me, the ocean it's a place of comfort. Like being out in the ocean isn't scary at all. It's actually a place of comfort. It's also for me a place of community. Uh, I like being in the ocean on my own, but I much prefer to be in the ocean with others, because it's a place of connection and talking, like with my twin brother when he and I surf, or my good friends. Like I always want to surf with somebody. It's better. It's a place of community and connection, place of exercise for sure. That's all part of it. And I would say the ocean is also a place of, on some levels, codependence, which is kind of odd. And what I mean by that is, like in my family with my two older brothers, I said, and again, my two older brothers did a lot of stuff, but they were always someone I looked up to. And so on some levels, in order to kind of be accepted in our family, you had to be at the ocean. You had to surf. You had to kind of fit in. So like, sometimes you have football families, everybody has to play football. Sometimes you have whatever, art families, everybody does art. You have music families, everyone's going to sing in the choir. For us, it was the ocean in terms of my experience with my brothers. And so that was, there have been times in high school, I would be walking down to go surf or bodyboard, and I'd be like, I don't even want to be here. What am I doing? This is dumb. I just want to leave. But I would go anyway because it's just what we did, which is, for me, it's kind of interesting when I look back at what that was. So it's the whole gamut. So really, for me, ocean is deeply connected to family and to the relationships that I have with my brothers and with people. I love it though. I mean, I love being down there. I'm the guy who's out in the water who is unable to not to talk to many people.
Well, and you've mentioned that
Yeah.
like you've had great conversations while sitting on your board outside of the sets, waiting for the good one to come in. What's special about that space, especially not just with your family or with your good friends, but you seem to have great conversations with others that are out there. What is it about that space that makes that possible?
What is it about that space that makes that possible? What makes it possible for me in my interactions is I have this deep-seated sense that people like to be seen and to be known. And so, like, if someone takes off on a wave and they have a good wave, I get not just as much, but I get a lot of joy seeing other people have like a super good wave and just enjoy it. And you can tell they're stoked. And so what makes it possible is that when they're paddling out, I'll look at them and I'll say, sometimes I'll say it this way. I'll say, oh my gosh, dude, I needed a camera on that wave. I don't even know him. I'll just say it to him. I needed a camera because, dude, that was awesome. Like I was like, oh, take a picture quick. Back when we still used just cameras as opposed to phones. And it starts a conversation because they see seen. And also, I think what makes it possible is other people, when they are out in the water to have fun and to experience aloha, I think ohana, that idea of family, is a part of it. Now, again, there's always a flip side. The flip side is when there's a limited resource in waves, people get angry and territorial and localism kicks in. And so there's also that part, which doesn't breed safety and or community. It breeds, arrogance and frustration. But it's all a part of it. Like in my head, even when that happens at this point, because I'm 58, right? When that happens, I kind of laugh. I'm like, yeah, that used to probably bother me when I was little. But right now I'm like, they just don't see it. They don't see the gift that we're all experiencing right now. They're just seeing themselves and their self-focused, and they're seeing what they don't get as opposed to seeing what they do get. For me, a classic story is my brother Dave had just got out of jail, and he's a huge surfer dude, and he was out in the water, and there was a professional surfer who was out in the water at this beach where we grew up in Orange County called Salt Creek. There's a professional surfer that he knows, and my brother Brian is in the surf industry, knows a lot of professional surfers, but Dave's out there, and this professional surfer who travels all over the world, gets paid to surf, and is on the circuit. He paddles up to my brother Dave. He's like, dude, I'm just so over this. I'm just so tired of surfing. I'm tired of the blah, 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 blah. And Dave looks at him and goes, I just got out of jail. You have no idea what a gift this day is. And I think that's what creates a space. Like, part of what creates a space is knowing, like for us, we live in a place where people fly all over the world to see. And it's a gift. Like, I think that's what creates a space for me. I see that.
Do you think there's anything to the leveling of the playing field when you're out there waiting? What strangers see, and forgive me if you're not this, but is an old white longboarder dude. And it's not Pastor Tom. It's not convict. It may not even be professional surfer, whatever, but it's just a dude on a surfboard surfing. And you engage at that level playing field. And I think that probably blew the professional surfer away.
Oh, yeah.
And put them back into, this is special.
Yeah.
I think if you see a local kid just rip it going down the waves, and you go, man, I wish I had a camera. All of a sudden they're able to, oh, okay, maybe the whole tribalism of the local surfers isn't as important if this guy is being who he is. And then later on, I think the discovery that, oh, that dude's a pastor, they don't expect that in real life, in real interactions. Because I remember when I spent a little bit of time as a pastor, the only thing I could differentiate is that I didn't get to hear the good jokes because I knew I was a pastor. But if I met them someplace else, they would all be saying it, and I would not tell them that I was a pastor just so I could continue that interaction. I think being on a wetsuit and on a surfboard, man, that creates a great opportunity to meet people where they're at.
Oh, and to be met where you're at. Both are true. To meet people where they're at, and also to be met, because you're right. Oh, the last thing I want to do when I meet someone is to tell them I'm pastor. That's like the last thing I want to do.
Yeah.
Because it's just like, it would be no different if someone were to start a conversation with, oh, by the way, I'm the CEO of Amazon.
Yeah.
Right? Like, nobody does that. Like, nobody starts with, unless of course.
Yes, they do.
Okay. Well, that's what I was going to say. Unless of course that is their primary identity.
Right.
And that's what they want to show first. Like, for me, my primary identity is not what I do as a pastor. My primary identity is who I am as a person. And the pastor is what I get to do to get paid, which actually helps that,
Yeah. And I do think that it's that the idea that, hey, people, pastors are people. It's not the position. It's not all these things, but primarily, and when you talk about identity, it's not what you do, it's where you find yourself. And all these different, the intersectionalities of identities, ultimately, I do think you choose where your primary identity is. I choose to find my primary identity, not in my race, not in my color, not in my sexual orientation, but in my relationship to Christ, and that I was bought for a price. And so my primary identity is that. Now, when I was a pastor was not my identity.
Yeah.
But it was so hard to walk in the world in that role and have people not saying, oh, you're a pastor, therefore, whatever their experience is with the church, oh, you're a pastor, you're a hypocrite. Oh, you're a pastor, you're paid to love me. Those types of things. It's like, no, I am first and foremost somebody who wants to be present and real and care about people and have people care about me, have people allow me to help them and want to help me, those types of things. and not step back like what you said. If somebody introduces themselves as, hello, I'm John, CEO of fill in the blank, what they're doing is, I think, is they're playing a power trip, and they want to immediately leverage their position, and they've created they're emotionally and socially tied to their role, which is a dangerous thing because that role disappears.
That's again a great comment going back to what in the ocean, because I think you're right. Like with everything you just shared in the ocean, there's different skill levels, but it's a level playing field. You're all there waiting for that. No, that fits really well. And again, and in the ocean, like you really wouldn't paddle over and say, I'm a CEO, because in that moment, what really matters is how are you surfing?
Well, and don't let the ocean kill you.
Yeah, well, okay. Well, yeah.
I think that because when you said that, the first thing I thought of, man, there's a huge difference between my ability to surf and a pro surfer's ability to surf.
Totally.
When you compare that to the power of the ocean, that's such a minuscule difference. When you put it into the context of the power of the waves in the ocean, that difference is so small.
Dude, you're drawing me into one of my philosophies of life, and I'm just going to share it right now, just because we're talking. The way I think about the ocean and what I teach when I do surf camps or whatever is the first rule of the ocean always wins. The ocean does not care about you. The ocean is nature. You can't personify it. You cannot control it. The first time you think you're in control of the ocean, I'm not saying it allows you, but you do have control as you get better with skill. But the best of the best, they know the ocean is always in control. In terms of, that's hard. I don't say it, I have to say it differently, but it always wins. That's how I look at it. And you got it, and that, I think that's what the best of the best. There's a humility that comes with.
Would it be maybe the best of the best control what the ocean gives them, and takes advantage of what is offered by this huge power. But as soon as you take that for granted, that what it offers is a gift, you get yourself in trouble. And I do think that idea, the illusion of control, is made apparent when you're dealing with waves in the ocean. But I think that's the truth. We put ourselves in the world of illusion, and we fool ourselves when we think we have control. And working with business people, they will think if we succeed, it was because I did it. If we fail, it was because everything else went wrong. But the role that uncontrolled circumstances play in success and failure, that's just, it's empirically proven that a lot of our successes are due to things beyond our control. A lot of our failures are due to things beyond our control. We don't have control over outcomes as much as we think. We do over our performance, but there's always circumstances out there that will impact the outcome that are beyond our control.
Great example, COVID. I mean, what happened, especially in California with all the shutdowns and regulations and all that, like you did not have control over so much, and yet the skill level, the positioning yourself, you did have control over how you would receive it. I love how you said that, because I think you're right. Like at some level with surfing and with life, how you receive what you've been given, and then what you do with it. I mean, that's part of the outcome, right? And positioning yourself to receive it. Like you shift the position. If the weather changes and the waves shift, you do something different. You can't stick with what you did an hour ago when the tide has shifted and the wave has moved. You have to shift.
Yeah, it's the people who, when like the break has moved up the coast or something like that, and the guys who stubbornly sit there, this is my favorite spot. I will stay here even though the waves aren't here. Yeah.
Because at that point, you're not there for the waves. You're there because it's your favorite spot.
Right. Yeah. And the people, and then you see like there's some people who visit the beach, not surfers, that will stand right in the middle of the break zone and just get pummeled because they're raging against the waves. I just want to stand here and get hit by waves.
Yeah.
And the people who like, people who've been to the ocean a bit are going, what? Why are you standing there just risking getting hurt to rage against the waves? Yeah, but shifting on, and this is another piece that I think is really unique about you. I want to know what the role of music has to do in both your journey, but also in what you do right now.
So yeah, music. So just for if anyone's listening, I play piano and been doing that since I was a 7-year-old or 6-year-old, whatever it was. I got a degree in music at the University of Redlands in church music and keyboards. I play enough guitar to sing Twinkle Twinkle Little Star with the kids at church, but not enough to do much more than that, except maybe lead a praise song. So music is a big part of me. And so what does it have to do with me? So music, well, a couple places, I think. One place, music is a place of solace or a place of comfort. When I am going through something difficult, when my wife was pregnant and we lost the first child with a stillbirth, I found myself sitting at the piano for 2 hours, just improvising and playing. And music has functioned as that place for me, just a place where I go for myself. It's not about performance. It's not about, but just playing. And, I have enough skill and improvisation. So that it's just helpful. I just go. So that's one of the places for music. The other place is music as a discipline has really helped me to understand the pastorate. So like when I was a music major in college, I came to the realization at some point that the work will never be finished. You can always take a classical piece, and I was doing classical music, and make it better. Like there's always like so at some point you just have to say, this is what I have. And so for ministry, it was helpful for me in ministry because in some level, the work in ministry will never be finished. There's always something else you can do. Even in working on sermons, like there's always something else. And what I learned through music in terms of studying music is you just present what you do at the time. And when you present it, whether it's a project or whether it's preaching, you do what you can, and and that's it. Like it's enough. It's enough when you've done the work. So that was really helpful to me. And then the other aspect of music that has been big for me in ministry, and you and I have talked a little bit about this, is improvisation. So for me, I never really knew anything about improvisation, never learned it. I did some jazz, but even then I didn't quite get it until I sat down with an instructor who we studied improvisation for a semester in college, and realizing that improvisation is reacting to what happens with you, but you need to be prepared. Like improvisation isn't you just make it up. You need to kind of have the skill and the level to do that. And then improvisation is you react in the moment. So whether it's in a worship service, I think about worship services as improvisation, you react to the place. So you have to pay attention. Improvisation isn't waiting for your time to solo. Improvisation is being in the moment with everyone who's already soloing, and then you take what they've done and you add to it, or you receive it at least, and you do. So for me, and it's the same thing like we talked about earlier about like relationships and everything else. Like on some levels, every day is a practice of improvisation, receiving what you get today, and then it adds to it. Like preparing a sermon. Like I like when you're working on a sermon, I'm aware during my week there might be something happening this week that's going to inform where the sermon goes. And you react to it in like a horrific would be when Borderline Bar and Grill, when we had a mass shooting in our area, and 13 people were killed. I think it was 13, but that includes a shooter. When that happened, you could not preach what you had prepared. I could not preach, I'll say it that way, what I had already prepared that day or that week. And because you had to, and again, improvise with what was going on in community and receive it. And so music, like to your question,
Yeah.
that feeds all of it. Like it feeds all of both the discipline of music, improvisation of music, and also music as a place of solace and comfort.
Well, I was just talking with a friend who's way into improv, and I've worked with improv in curriculum design and stuff like that. And what we realized is that it takes a lot of preparation and study in order to be spontaneous.
Absolutely.
And I don't think people realize that when they're talking about it. You need to have a whole body of training and just focus so that you could improvise in the right direction in the right way. And then it's about it. No matter how much prep you did, you've got to be present in the moment to put out there the direction that it's going. And I think about not only like borderline being able to step up there and all the prep you did didn't go to waste.
Mm-hmm.
It's still there, because your brain was not first focusing on the message, it was focused on the people in the room. That tells you when to pivot, when to yes and your work into something else. But you also see it, okay, if you're out there and you want to see an amazing church experience, look at, I think it was the last Christmas Eve service where you went over and sat at the piano,
Mm-hmm.
and you started riffing on doing, was it
Silent Night.
Silent Night in different keys and different styles. And that you just played what you were speaking. But because you'd studied music, you'd gone so far back, not only musically, but theologically, and combined your musical experience with your theological study to be present in the moment, to change it from a dirge in a minor key to a boogie woogie celebration. And that went along with what you're talking about. So that's a Monte Vista Presbyterian Church. They do a live stream. So check out this last year's Christmas Eve service.
No, and like that moment too, like that for me is an area of growth. Like you're absolutely right, because I was super nervous about doing that because I didn't quite know, because it was new and I was kind of doing this and this. But like to your point, like when I was in the moment, I wasn't nervous at all because I wasn't thinking about what I'm doing. I was just in the moment, and because of playing a boogie woogie bass line since I was in the 9th grade, right? Like I wasn't even thinking about how my left hand was playing the bass, because you're right, like absolutely, because then you could be present,
Yeah. So I want to start wrapping things up, and I'm going to go to a lightning round. And what this means, I'm going to ask you a question, and I want your first thought. Now,
Okay.
You're not signing a lifelong contract that's your response forever. It's just what's top of your mind right now. So let's go to the lightning round. And the first one is, what is your favorite book, and these days media? What is your favorite book or media to give as a gift?
Favorite book or media to give as a gift, I would say right now is vinyl albums.
Any particular ones?
Anything from the 70s and 80s when all the music was the best. Yeah, I think probably.
So I'm assuming Rush might be part of that.
Oh yeah, well you can, yeah, Rush, yes, Styx, Queen, so much of Motown, just pick it all.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I bring up Rush because I mentioned you are a golden retriever owner, and
Yes.
your new puppy is named
Geddy Lee,
Geddy Lee.
singer of Rush. In fact, I'm reading Geddy Lee's autobiography.
Yeah. So you introduced my son Pax to Rush because he had to figure out who Geddy Lee was.
Oh, good. Well,
So, your
quality
job
music
is done.
Nothing you have to apologize for with Rush.
Okay. Next question. And I used to just ask this, who are your heroes? But I found, especially these days, people can't necessarily point to one person. So I want to say, if you were going to construct your hero from 2 or 3 different people, who would they be, and what parts would you take from them to construct your hero?
One would be my dad. And what I would take from my dad is his ability to tell story. And he's just just straight up bartender, blue collar listener, my dad. One would be Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. His ability to speak about love and to call people to love both enemy and neighbor. I would like that as a hero. So my dad, Dr. King. I think Anne Lamott, a writer. I think she's a hero of mine, and the ability for her to express herself, and she can be raw and eloquent at the same time, and I love that. So probably Dr. King, my dad, Anne Lamott, and then I'm just gonna roll with somebody nobody knows, except maybe if you live in this area. There's a woman at our church whose name was Dorothy Jorgens. I was just thinking about her. I'm going to be doing a memorial service for her daughter coming up. And Dorothy was this 90-year-old woman who was still playing tennis. She was throwing her birthday party at the church, and she just had a love of life. And I would say Dorothy. So those four.
Wonderful. Those are all great qualities. Another question, different tack. What's one thing you've rethought or changed your mind about recently? Not even recently, just like what's the major thing that you've rethought or changed your mind about?
I am definitely in a rethinking of how the church does well in a culture that has shifted. So I'm in the process of how do we address and love as Jesus loved and teach as Jesus teach in a culture that is shifting, both its communication shifting with AI and all that, and the internet. Of course, people talk about this major historical shift to communication, identity issues, like you already mentioned. How does the church speak into that? And I'm rethinking, like, how do these texts, these words that have been with us for thousands of years, that I believe are living and active, speak into a culture? So that's a big kind of a rethinking thing. So for me.
Great. Okay, last one. Who do you find yourself quoting most often these days? And it could be movie, it could be book, it could be like cultural icon, whatever it is. What's your favorite quotes right now?
Oh, what's my favorite quotes, or who do I quote the most?
Yes.
Okay.
Whatever comes up.
Oh, okay, I got you. Okay, so one of my favorite quotes is, they call it a Chinese proverb, but it's probably Buddhist. The best way to get the pearl from the bottom of the pond is to allow the water to settle. I love that quote because it for all kinds of reasons. I love that. Over the top, love that. Who I quote the most if I'm preaching or writing, it is not unusual for me to quote Dr. Martin Luther King or St. Francis. Those are two kind of go-to people for me. And well, heroes, even Anne Lamott isn't unusual for me to have a quote from her as a part of that. And the other quotation that is really well known, but it matters to me, I think it's Maya Angelou who said it in terms of how I memorize it, but I know it comes from other places as well. When someone tells you who they are, believe them.
Yeah.
That's a big one for me too.
Yeah. Yeah. That's important across the board.
Yeah.
Well, Tom, thank you so much for taking time with me today.
Yeah, John, thanks.
Even though we spent a lot of time together, I learned new stuff about you. Actually, every time we talk, but especially this time. So thank you very much.
And thank you. You're the same for me. I learned a lot from you. You've been my mentor in many ways. So thank you.
Be present and kind as you do great things.